Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you to the popular talk show series hosted by Delhi Public School Bangalore East, Power Hour, which provides a platform to delve into enthralling facts and entrancing notions. I'm Deboshri Chatterjee from the Social Science Department, and I'm immensely excited to be your host for this evening. I'm joined by my co host, Ms. Riparna Chetri, also from the Social Science Department. As we are now celebrating Social Science Week in DBS Bangalore East, what could have been better than a motivating session encapsulating the essence of social science and its dynamism? In the words of Carl Rogers, the social sciences seek to uncover the mysteries of human behavior, thought, and emotion. We are looking forward to potential conversations, illuminating ideas, and exploring various dimensions of social science as a subject. So, without a further ado, let's begin today's episode, highlighting the diverse domains of social science. I now take this humble opportunity to welcome our esteemed panel members for today's talk show. Let me start by welcoming Professor Samira Junaid, faculty at Azim Premji University. Professor Samira Junaid is a historian of early modern South Asia with an interest in religion and its entanglements with political economy. She is currently working on a monograph tentatively titled The Many Dargahs of Nagaur, Relocating Tamil Islam in the Bay of Bengal Littoral. The book analyzes the rise to prominence of South India's most celebrated Sufi, the 16th century figure Shahul Hamid, and the shrine that emerged around his burial site in Nagaur on the Coromandel coast. Alongside, she is also working on an article on the forgotten history of Islamic Carnatic music. Here she intends to explore the rich archive of songbooks containing raga based compositions written in Tamil by the Muslim poets of South India. She earned her PhD in December 2019 from the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and her master's and MPhil degrees from JNU New Delhi and Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta, respectively. She worked for a few years in the book publishing industry at Tulika Books and Routledge, New Delhi. Apart from research and teaching, she enjoys listening to music and singing, baking and trying new recipes, and learning new skills, both artistic and practical. A very warm welcome to you, Professor Samira. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It is an honor to introduce a scholar whose research traverses the complex intersection of caste, religion, and the sociology of knowledge. Our distinguished guest, Professor Sunandan K.N., is renowned for his groundbreaking work in exploring the politics of caste and religion, as well as the intricate histories and sociological dimensions of scientific practices. Professor Sunandan brings a unique perspective to the study of how caste and religion influence and are influenced by historical and contemporary scientific practices. His area of interest and expertise includes practices of knowledge production, historical and sociological study of caste, and politics of caste and religion. He has done his BTech in Production Engineering, MPhil in Science Policy Studies from JNU, and PhD in History from USA. He has written a book titled Caste, Knowledge and Power, Ways of Knowing in the 20th Century Malabar. He has edited chapters in books Locating Education, School, Family and Community, and the Practice of Care. He has written journal articles on critical mind and laboring body, caste and education reforms in Kerala. Please join me in welcoming Professor Sunandan, whose innovative research promises to offer us new and thought provoking perspectives on these critical issues. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Now, to brief our guests as well as our viewers on the structure of the program, we begin with the question round where we ask 5 questions to our distinguished guests, followed by the rapid fire round. Thereafter, we would request our guests to make the closing statement. So let's begin with the question round. And my first question goes to Professor Samira. Ms. Samira, your profound research work exemplifies your vivid interest for history. What really fascinated you to study history or pursue your research in the field of history?
That's a good question. And I think at different points in time in my life, the motivations have been different. I would say that when I was a kid, my house always had lots of books around. Even when I couldn't read, I would flip through books because they had very interesting pictures. And I distinctly remember one book called The History of the World, in which it had the most beautiful illustrations of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, the most beautiful illustrations of the gardens of Babylon, the pyramids of Giza, and such. And I used to always, I couldn't read at that time. And still, there was something about these images that used to captivate me. Of course, in school, you have your allotted set of disciplines, and you don't really have a choice. You study everything that is given to you. By class 10, by class 9 and 11, I don't know if the system is different now, but when we were in school, the first choice you made was about language. It's only really in class 11 that you chose a discipline as such. So all the way until class 10, history came along, right? And you don't have a choice in the matter. And I think at that time, what really kept me hooked to the subject were our teachers. I was in school 20 years ago now, and I know that the books have changed a great deal. When we were in school, the textbooks, the CBSE history textbooks were good, but not the greatest, I would say. They not exactly the most captivating compared to the books I saw at home. But we had fantastic teachers in school, and I think it was being in the presence, in their presence, in the class, and the way they talked about history, they really brought it to life. And so rather than studying from a textbook, we were really, it was almost like a cinematic rendering of history that we were getting through these lectures that our teachers were providing us. So that was my second sort of hook that kept me on to history. After that, I think my decision to stay with history has been a product of many things. One of them definitely was my continuing interest in the subject. I found that what I studied was enough to keep me there, right? And I kept going with the subject. So I did my bachelor's in history, a master's in history, an MPhil in history, a PhD in history. As you can see, Sunandan has had a very different trajectory, right? He came to history from the field of engineering in comparison, whereas I have very much stuck to history right from the get-go. And there were several other options, which later on I might discuss as to what you can do with history. You don't have to become a historian because you're studying history. But for me, somehow, the things I read, the people who taught me, and the kinds of questions, the kinds of debates that history is animated by, these were enough. I would say I use the word enough. I know it's not a very exciting word, but when you're choosing to stay in academics, right, as opposed to taking up a different kind of profession, you just need an excuse, and just enough of a reason to keep you hooked to what you're studying, because there's lots of pressure from the rest of the world to do something which is more job oriented, right? We'll talk about this later, but I think my books at home, my teachers in school, the things that historians have been interested in looking at, especially when you get into higher studies, right? The history we study in school compared to the history we teach and study in college is very different. And when you get into history at the higher studies level, it just becomes this Pandora's box full of exciting, interesting things that you don't want to leave, if you're someone like me. So I stuck around and I continue to do this. The other thing I think I should mention is that I grew up in Delhi, the city which gives DPS its name. I should also mention that I was in a school that saw itself as a great competitor of DPS. Oh dear, I'm so sorry. We seem to have lost the power in my apartment, but should come back in a minute. I'll keep talking,
Problem, ma'am.
but I'm there. You can hear my voice.
Yes, ma'am.
Um, it was because I was in Delhi, and Delhi, for those of you who have visited, and if you haven't had the opportunity, you must go, is absolutely peppered and littered with historical monuments. There is no place you can go without running into some kind of historical site or the other. And in that kind of environment, it's very difficult to turn a blind eye to history, right? You're experiencing it on a daily basis. Your school trips, your trips with your friends, where you go with your relatives when they come to visit, these are frequently historical monuments that you're going to, right? And that interest in history that I had was facilitated by the fact that I was in a place like Delhi, where history was all around us. There's more to be said here because it's a whole life's commitment to history. But I'll stop now, and I'll also try and figure out what's happening with the power situation in my house.
That's really inspiring, ma'am. I must say, it's indeed been a captivating journey, and your love for history is quite evident.
Thank you. There we go. We're back.
Okay, we are back. Actually, I wanted to just say this, ma'am. Like, history really defines us. And as you said, you fell in love with history, because of your teachers, your friends, books, and all. I fell in love with history because of my grandfather, the stories he used to relate, ancient, the stories and the places. As a form of treat, he used to take us to, nearby historical places. And trust me, it's still embedded in my memories. Those were beautiful moments that I shared personally with my grandfather, and I'm going to cherish it. I mean, he's no longer there, but yes, really that relationship was built on that. I really remember it, and thank you so much for it. Now, my question is to Professor Sunandan. In spite of having a BTech in production engineering, surprisingly pursued your higher studies in the field of social science. So, what motivated you to take up social science as a subject, sir?
So, I will not say in spite of, I will say because in my views, technology is a social science in some sense. It's so I will explain why it is, but the thing is that I grew up in 1970s and 80s in Kerala. So at that time, in my house and surrounding areas, literature was the one of the, literary persons were the stars, in media or in any place. Media means papers, newspapers, and journals, etc. So everybody, those who have little taste into that, want to be a poet, want to be a novelist, want to be a short story writer. So that inspires you to read a lot, first of all. And libraries were plenty around us. And that reading habit actually allowed me to, I continued that habit when I was even doing my engineering, which uh, not only Malayalam literature, but world literature, and then moved into other kind of, say, philosophical writings, historical and sociological texts, not studying anything, not for the purpose of studying or any degree, but we were, not just me, I'm not saying it's just not me. Everybody was, not everybody, I'm saying people around me were very much into literature and kind of reading social science books. And also when I was doing engineering, I was very active with students' politics. And so that also enabled me to understand uh, many kind of political debates, not just from practice, but also from books. And I think that's what students miss now. Many schools do not have political organizations, which I think we have a big problem, which reduce their exposure. But I was fortunate to, especially in Kerala, to have that kind of atmosphere. And that also kept my interest in social science. And I also found, I worked as an engineer for some time, and I found out that I'm not very good in it. Uh, Not that my parents forced me to do engineering or that. That also I will not say. Everybody was going for engineering. Then think what to do. So I thought what to do after engineering. So I thought that I'm interested in social science. So I did an MA in sociology first, and then I was interested in technology already. So applied in Jawaharlal Nehru University for in the science and technology, sorry, science policy program, where I did my MPhil. So I continued my interest in technology. Even when I moved to history, my work is about carpenters, mainly history of technology kind of work. So I will say engineering enabled me to think about society, but at different issues. But also I was always interested in the social, like issues in the social, but also reading about it. So I think that is the reason I'm now in social science.
Thank you, sir. It was truly enlightening. I must really admit that growing up, books were also, there was no media, there was no internet, right? So the books used to be my friend, my best friend in the times of need when I was down or when I was happy. They were a source of inspiration to me. And it really helped build my personality. And point noted, sir, I'm sure ma'am has also heard it that we're going to ensure that there's some political organization we do have in the school so that, something that the kids can look forward to. Now, my question too is to Professor Samira. Often teachers find it challenging, including myself, to deliver social science as a fascinating subject, ma'am. Can you provide us with some effectual guidelines on how to make social science a subject more engaging for the students? And some ideas to correlate beyond the conventional curriculum that we have, ma'am.
So I'm not the best place to talk about social science, but I'm more the history person, and my colleague Sunandan will give you much better advice in some sense about the teaching of social science to school children. But I suppose social studies, includes what we then at the level of higher education separate out into history and social sciences, right? So, but I'll still keep my comments to what I could say about the teaching of history. What I have learned both as a student and reflecting on my days as a student, now that I'm a teacher, and I am faced with students who are not very different from how I was in the classroom when I was a student myself. I think one thing I must tell all the students who are present here is that the people who teach you were not necessarily A+ students when they were in classrooms themselves. They too fell asleep every now and then. They too found things uninteresting and boring every now and then. But they persevered at some level at a later point in time, and have a greater appreciation for what they were being taught when they were students themselves. And they take that experience and come back to the classroom and hope to teach you differently from how they were taught when they were students, right? So now when I have students in my class who are 20 years younger than I am, right? And I'm talking to them as a historian who thinks everything is very interesting. Everything I read, everything I ask them to read, everything is very interesting. But of course, they frequently come to class and they look at me like, why did you ask us to read this? This is not interesting at all. Okay, that's at the college level. I got a little carried away. Let me talk about how it is in school. So school is a little bit, school has its challenges, but also some ways out. One is that you do have a textbook, right?
Yes.
The textbook is giving you a very clear path forward through the course of a year or a semester or a trimester, however your academic year is divided. And it tells you all the things that are really important and interesting as well that you need to know in order to cover the curriculum, right? When I was in, like I mentioned earlier, the textbooks we had in school when I was in school were not very interesting. And in comparison to that, the textbooks that came out later on, which were actually written by people who taught us when I was doing my master's and I was doing my MPhil, are far more interesting. And what makes them interesting, I think, and what can help in the teaching of history is a focus on the sources that historians rely on in order to say anything about the past, right? So one of the big transitions that students have to make when they continue their engagement with history from school to, let's say, higher education, assuming some of you are interested in history enough that you might want to do a bachelor's in history as well, one of the big transitions you have to make is that the textbook gives you a kind of finished up version of history, as if this is all there is to know. right? And we have studied something and we now know what can be said about it, and this is the truth once and for all, right? Whereas when we come to college and we start reading about the same issues, the same periods, the same sources, the same questions, we suddenly find that there are actually multiple perspectives that have been brought to bear on the same question, on the same evidence, on the same source. And this can become overwhelming, right? Because you're not used to studying history in this way. Whereas when you're in school, I think there is the time and there is also a certain kind of freshness in the way we are approaching history as students, where I think we can be introduced to sources to get a sense of how is it that historians know what they know? How are they able to make the kind of claims that they're able to make? Why do they think this is interesting as opposed to that being interesting? What is this fascination with dates? I had this very strange, funny moment actually earlier this week as I was teaching my class. Now, these are second year history students, and they've already done a number of courses in history. And so you think they know, what is this whole deal about history and why are we interested in dates? What is the principal preoccupation that historians have? And I was very surprised to find that everybody in the class said the one thing historians care about is dates.
Absolutely.
And I expected to hear this answer, did not expect to hear this answer from anyone who's in college doing history, because one of the things that we keep telling incoming students when they come and do a BA in history is that, forget about the time when you had to mug up dates. You don't have to mug up dates, right? Now what we want you to do is to understand why any and all of these dates are important, right? The moment you have that kind of understanding, the dates, you will remember them without having to force yourself to remember them. They will stay in your minds because now you know why they were important, right? And so there's this kind of another way of approaching the subject rather than thinking about it as a curriculum, as a syllabus that must be covered because there is an exam at the end of the year. And I realize that that is a real that's something that teachers have to do and students have to do, which is to prepare for the exam that comes at the end of the year, right? And I'll tell you what my history teacher in school did. She figured out what you call a kind of workaround, right? To deal with the issue that we are preparing for an exam, but the subject of history has so much more to offer that if you only think about it from the perspective of an exam, you might lose interest and you will not enjoy what is actually being taught. And so what she used to do was she would quickly go over the textbook in the class with us, which would give us a sense of, okay, this is what we need to know in order to write the exam. And then, based on her own knowledge and her own reading and her own interest in the subject, she used to talk to us about what was in the book, but from a very different kind of point of view. It was almost like a storytelling session. And suddenly, the whole class, even the folks who would not necessarily do that well in exams, they were all alive, all awake, and all paying attention because now it's coming to you in the form of a story rather than a textbook chapter, right? That's a very different way of experiencing content rather than it becomes much less dull in that sense. So I think that it's challenging because there are exams. There is the expectation that you have to cover the curriculum that the textbook contains, right? But there are ways and ways, I think, of introducing a certain kind of juiciness of history, right? Whether it is through a discussion of the primary sources, whether it's a discussion of the debates that historians have had over something that we know well, like the revolt of 1857. Why is that something we still need to discuss? What is the disagreement between historians, right? You can add drama, you can add a certain kind of energy or juiciness, as I was calling it, right, to the whole discussion. And then, there are so many little tips and tricks. I don't know if I should share them, but I've had classes where we have had students play historical roles.
Yes.
Right? So play acting, certain key moments in history, and then there is a greater sense of ownership amongst the students about what they're reading. There isn't that sense of like, oh, I need to mug this up for an exam, right? Which is so often the way we approach school learning, and it's a time in our life where we have very much fewer responsibilities compared to when we grow up, and I think we are really giving up on the pleasure and the fun of learning in these years, because the stakes get higher and higher as you get older and older. And when you're younger, you have the chance to actually play around with what you're learning about, right? So you should have that sort of attitude, I think, both as a student as well as the instructor who is introducing those themes and topics to students in the class.
Thank you, ma'am. So it's really appreciate your words of wisdom. A pinch of drama in history is a necessity in life, I guess. Over to you, Devo.
That's a great perspective, I must say. My next question is for Professor Sunandan. Sir, how do you see the impact of social media affecting the social ideologies of the current generation? According to your opinion, is it a boon or a bane?
Okay, so I will not say either, like it's not definitely you can have a position on that in either or. Uh, so social media is there. We cannot wish away it. It is there. And definitely, unlike, say, when I was growing up, I have to get news through newspapers. Of course, newspapers have their own politics. They ignore certain news, they include. Newspapers were always exclusionary in many senses. They were not very inclusive spaces. Then television came, it's also became like that. But now social media has, in a sense, democratized communication and news and also enabled artistic expression and technological creativity in a very different level. So I will say when I was growing up, everybody wants to be a poet or a writer. Now in everybody in Kerala wants to be a filmmaker or, like some kind of filmmaking. That's the aspiration that which enable, because you can make a film through using a mobile phone. So I think that technological change has enabled us to a different, but at the same time, we all know that it has serious impact uh, on our cognitive processes. Some people may say the attention deficit or different kinds of problem. It is affecting me also, like it's not that it's only affecting the children. It's very difficult now to sit and read a long academic works continuously. I'm distracted. So there is a problem. But at the same time, as a lecturer, for say, as a teacher, I feel that my life becomes so easy. Any book I want, I can just download. Of course, illegally, but it is available somewhere in the web. You don't have to wait the library to buy it, and like so that is really enabling all of us to provide readings, for example, showing videos. All this is, classes we can use the internet and like sources in YouTube and other places where videos are plenty in any subject. So I think in an education purpose, if we use carefully, it has been tremendous help. The changes that social media, not only social media, I will say generally the media technologies enabled us uh, teaching into a different direction. And the challenges we are facing, we have to find, say, for example, AI created answers, etc. Those are there. But we have to be creative to be in this situation. I think, of course, there's huge mental health issues also, some doctors might say, due to use of social media, etc. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
So the thing is that idea of moderation, which is not there. That's my, including me, I'm not blaming anyone. Moderation is the key word, I think, in anything. Addiction is problem, any kind of thing. Addiction to anything is a problem.
We completely agree to you, sir, and relate to you. Social media has really taken over. And I think every must mull over for the thought provoking answer. My next question to Professor Samira. Ma'am, can you please throw some light on your current research work on a monograph titled The Many Dargahs of Nagaur? What captivated you to choose this topic of research?
Um, Okay, so this monograph that I'm working on is really coming out of the research I did for my PhD. Um, there's a long backstory. I'm trying to figure out the shortest version of this that I can tell everyone without boring them. I grew up in North India. I grew up in Delhi. My parents come from two different religious communities as well as two different ends of the country. So my father is from the north, he was Muslim. My mother is from the south, and she is Hindu. And I had, growing up, I was always interested in the history of Islam in the subcontinent, which has been both an interesting subject, but also a very politicized and political subject with a lot of relevance in the contemporary period, as we can see, right? It is much debated over what should we or should we not include in textbooks and such. At the time when I was choosing a path for my own research agenda, I was very aware of the fact that there had been a lot written about Islam in North India, both in terms of a political history, but also cultural histories, histories of religion, and such. And I had a bit of an advantage in that I was interested in Islam already. I had done a fair bit of reading on the subject, and I had facility with the language. I spoke Tamil at home, and this aspect, which is Islam's history in South India, was something that the more I read, the more I realized was actually something that was very, very underexplored. It was almost as if there was no Islam in South India, which we know is not true, right? In fact, the history of Islam in the South goes much further back than the history of Islam in the North. And yet there has been this strange sort of lack of interest and this kind of skewed focus on the North. And I decided, therefore, to turn my attention to the South. I was enabled in this by the department in which I was enrolled for my PhD program. They helped me uh, gain the kind of literary linguistic skills because I spoke the language but didn't know how to read Tamil. And you can't do any research worth its name without being able to read the language in which many of the sources are actually written in. So I went off to Madurai for a whole year where I learned to read Tamil. And from there, I kind of, while I lived in Madurai for a year, I also got a sense of the kind of world of Muslims in the South and the kind of centrality of the Dargah. This is not just true of the South, of course, it's true of the North as well. But it was in Madurai that I got a sense of this. And then it was also my first real encounter with Islam in the South, right? It was an intellectual question, but in terms of my actual lived experience, right? How much do I know by virtue of being there? This was the year that I really kind of got that exposure. And I came across this very fascinating site, which is located on the Coromandel coast. It's not far from Nagapattinam. It's not far from Tanjore. In fact, if you traced a horizontal line from Tanjore to the coast, to the Coromandel coast, you'd end up in this place called Nagur. And there is this fascinating dargah to which even today thousands of people come, not just Muslims. As we know dargahs to be spaces in which you find people who are not from Muslim community, who are frequently there to make various kinds of prayers and observances. And I was interested in the history of the emergence of this shrine. I got interested in its location as well because it was a port town where it came up. And so I was curious about what was the relationship between mercantile trade networks spanning the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean and this particular site. It emerged in the period when Europeans had started to enter into the Indian Ocean world as well. So this was kind of my starting sort of question, which is the relationship between trade networks and mercantile communities and this Sufi shrine. And as I did more of my research, I ran into, somewhat interestingly, not what I was looking for, which is evidence of these connections, but actually a lot of Tamil Islamic literary work in genres which we typically associate in a simplistic sense with Hinduism, right? So Puranas, for instance, right? There are a number of Tamil Muslim Puranas which you can read, which is also related to this other work that I'm trying to publish, which is about Islamic Tamil Carnatic music. Now, how many of us have heard of Carnatic music in which the theme of the song is actually the veneration of an Islamic hero? We haven't, right? This is a history we really don't know about. So both of my projects are really about bringing to light something that was very much a part of the Tamil social cultural world, at least until the early 20th century and definitely in the 19th century. But over the course of simply the 20th century itself, we have forgotten what is this world of literary production in Tamil that Tamil Muslims were also involved in. And that is the focus now of the monograph that I'm working on, which is this literary tradition that emerged, an elite literary tradition, and its development over the last 200 to 300 years. That's really the focus of my monograph.
Okay, that
Thank you.
sounds very interesting. I just got moved. I'm sure our audience must have been truly motivated.
Yes, ma'am, that was really captivating and something very interesting. I mean, to study further, right? So, my question to Professor Sunandan, as your area of interest and expertise lies in the field of social science, could you please acquaint our students on importance of studying the subject and how will it benefit their lives?
Okay. So here I have to say different levels of studying social science. I think at school level it should be compulsory, like it is compulsory now. But I think if you look into the, say, at least for technical education, IITs, if you look, were most of the it's considered to be the elite engineering institution. IITs, they have social science subjects, humanities and social science subject, and students have to study this. So why is this? This is the question. So even if you are studying science or whatever subject you are studying, it is in a context that we are practicing it. Even if you're a scientist, you are working inside a lab, you are working in a production company, etc. But all of this exists in a social and political context, historical context. So knowledge of this is in general is very important. In that sense, it's a general understanding of social science is necessary for everyone, not just for, like social scientists as such. So I think that is very important on the one hand. So that's why in our college, even if you are studying science, biology, physics, chemistry, maths, any subject, there are many papers that is compulsory, which you have to learn from social science and history. Say, for example, we call it set of papers called Understanding India, which is approach to understand India historically and also the contemporary India. So that is one way to why you should study social science. That is one thing. And I think, say, for example, it can be studied at any stage, even if you do a medicine and then you can come back and study social science. So it's not that you should take a degree directly in social science, but for those people who are having a passion in understanding society, different human life, parts of human life, creative ways of reflecting on, say, film through films, documentaries, whatever, or to be a media person or want to be a politician, all of them, I think, should have a serious understanding of uh, social theories and social debates that's already taking place and analysis, how to understand these phenomena, social as a phenomena. This is very important. So if you are special, I think specialization in those who have passion for that, they should, it's really important to have a kind of, it's not just, say, for example, people may say that if you want to be a politician, you directly engage in practice. But I think what is the problem now is that uh, directly engaging with practice prevent you from certain ways of understanding our society. It's becoming very limited way of your own experience, etc. Your experience is important, but it is limited. So I think that social scientists have a very important role in everybody's life. But also, I think if it's a passion, if you are practicing journalism, or if you are practicing, if you are an actor, want to be an actor, I think studying social science in general, I'm not saying it's a very particular subject, but social science in general enables you to widen your views, have a clear perspective on these things, and also make you as a citizen or as a human being. I think it's make you enable you to be a better human being, I will say.
Thank you, sir, for your motivating words. Social scientists do play a vital role in enabling all of us to be a better human being, because better us means a better country, right, sir? Now, my question to Professor Samira, as you have studied religion in various ways, how religion, according to you, has created an everlasting impact in history over the years, ma'am?
Wow, that is a big question. I don't even know if there is an answer to that question, but I'll reflect on the role or the presence or the entanglement of religion for historians, especially of South Asia. I think religion has been part of the conversation from the very beginning, right? I don't know if this is something you come across in school textbooks now, but there's this whole debate around the periodization of Indian history, right? Where the colonial period Indian history was periodized as Hindu, Muslim, and British. And later day historians raised questions about this scheme of periodization and have more recently, while there is some debate on the question, we have now worked with categories like either ancient, medieval, modern, or we have the early history, we have the early medieval, the later medieval, the early modern, the modern, and some and such, right? So we have tried to we have engaged with the question of history at one level, but on the other hand, we have tried to take history out of consideration, and we're thinking at least in terms of the periodization of history. Now, the thing is, how the impact of religion on history is one way to look at it, but this is a disciplinary perspective, right? So how do historians study religion as opposed to thinking about the impact of religion on history? So history is always interested in change over time, right? So even when we're thinking about the impact of any given religion, we will always be interested to see, we'll be focusing on a given period, or we'll be tracking the relative impact over a period of time, perhaps from the beginning of a particular religious group to a later period, a century or 2 centuries or 3 centuries later on, right? So it's very difficult to talk about the impact of history of religion on history across time and across space. So we have to kind of unpack the question or disaggregate the question and focus on particular times and particular places. The other thing is, of course, now how is any of this to be done, right? And this is where in history becomes really interesting, not so much in what do we have to say, but about how do we actually say the things that we do say. So, the study of religion has, at least its inception really was around making sense of texts. We had these texts, they were already part of the practice of our religions, right? So you have various texts associated with Hinduism, with Buddhism, with Jainism, with Sikhism, with Islam, with Christianity. And so early scholars of religion, in trying to understand what these religions were, would go straight to the text, right? That the text is going to tell us what these religions are. Now, of course, as you can imagine, most of us, even if we practice religion, don't practice religion, when we go out into the world and see people practicing religion, we don't necessarily encounter what the texts say, right? We encounter very different kinds of things that people are doing. And how do you account for that? So at one level, one thing you can say is that there is a difference between what the texts are talking about and what people are actually doing, right? They need not necessarily be the same thing. The other is, of course, that there must have been some change that is taking place over time, whereas what people are doing today is not necessarily what people were doing 2,000 years ago, right? We have this tendency to think still, and this is something that historians are very much committed in trying to unsettle as a notion, is that when we think about Hinduism today, we can talk about Hinduism today, and it's in essence, it's the same religion that was there when the Aryans came to India, right? So that the religion that the Vedas contain is in essence the religion that is to be found as Hinduism even today. But a historical perspective on this question forces us to look at these texts and practices, look at evidence coming to us from different regions and different points in time, and interpreting that to get at what does the evidence actually allow us to say about the practice of X or Y or Z religion in any given place, right? So it forces us to step away from the idea that Islam is the same no matter which period and which region you're looking at, right? Or Hinduism is the same from the time of the Guptas until now. And of course, so now change is taking place. We admit that. How do we get at this change? We look at our sources. We look at texts, we look at inscriptions, we look at donations made to various temples, the kind of inscriptions we see all over South Indian temples. What are they actually recording, right? Another thing that we're really interested in is, of course, the relationship between religions, right? The encounter between, we typically we're thinking about the encounter between Hinduism and Islam, but what about the encounter between Hinduism and Buddhism? The encounter between Shaivism and Jainism, right? The encounter between various sects that make up these religious traditions, right? And so what historians will try to do is to try to get at specificity rather than thinking in terms of everlasting essences with which we can characterize X or Y or Z religious tradition. We will try to get at what is specific, what is changing, what is new, what is evolving in any given religious tradition in that period, in a certain time, in a certain place, right? Because if there's one thing that historians, if there's a tenet, if there's a religious tenet to what historians practice, it is that things keep evolving, things keep changing, and not necessarily one direction, right? It's not a linear trajectory. Things are changing because the context is always changing. There can be changes in climatic conditions that can affect what people are doing. There are, of course, changes in the political situation which affect what people are doing. There are changes in the economy which affect what people are doing, right? So instead of thinking about an unchanging past, right, what historians will emphasize time and time again is, in fact, what historians are looking at is change. That's what we're interested in studying. And it's no different when we study religion as well. So religious studies, and so it's important to remember that when historians study religion and when religious scholars study religion, these are two slightly different pursuits, right? They overlap, but they're not entirely the same. I think I'll stop with that. There is a lot to be said about the study of religion by historians and what sense they have made of that, but I'll leave it at this.
Truly said, the only thing that is constant is change. So your words definitely enrich the perspective and understanding, ma'am.
That's indeed a great explanation. My next question to Professor Sunanda. Sir, in your opinion, do you feel that the youth of today should develop their interest in the field of politics? If not, how can you motivate them to evoke their interest?
Okay, so when you say when you say field of politics, uh, we should understand, I think it's in a broader sense. So for example, I consider myself teaching as a very political practice, in the sense that we are developing certain kind of ideas and particular kind of human beings, enabling particular kind of human beings through textbooks, through classroom teaching. So that is what politics does. Impart certain, stand for certain ideologies, try to practice that ideologies. So in the broader sense, everybody are practicing in some or other kind of politics. But also, I think it is important that in the current situation or any other situation, it is important that especially students and young people are very much aware of the political, at least very much aware of the political issues. Because that is determining our future of the country, people, their lives, etc. So employment policies, anything, all kind of policies is determined by the policies of the political parties. All kind of social and cultural decisions are influenced by the positions of political parties. So on the one hand, everyone should be aware and study politics in that sense. That is one point. But I think more than that, students can, like what's there is a serious problem. The way I see politicians is that not, you cannot generalize all. I will not generalize, but that it has become a profession kind of, like any other profession. You want to make name, you want to make money, etc. But can we have a little different approach, which there was been different approach from many politicians, where you understand, and of course, I'm not saying corruption is the most important factor of politics, but corruption is everywhere. It's not just politicians that are corrupt. Maybe politicians, if you look the average, if you can do a statistics, I may say officials and business people are more corrupt than politicians. But I'm saying that certain kind of a value needed to have, like you have to take an ethical position. It can be wrong or right, but there should be a ethical framework through which you arrive in politics. That is not happening in the politics. I think your entry of lot of young people, I see in Kerala, for example, lot of all political parties have young leaders having a very different kinds of perspective about people and democracy, etc. So I think it's, on the one hand, India need youth to enter in politics, but also I think youth should be aware and very much interested in politics, because that's going to decide our future, like a very detrimental way.
That's really, really intriguing. I'm sure your ideas must encourage our young audience to be involved in the world of politics. After all, they are the flag bearers. So, my final question for today's evening to Professor Samira. Our viewers are really interested to know that what are the different avenues or prospects available to the students if they aspire to pursue history for higher education? How can it act as a stepping stone for their career graph?
Um, so when I was talking about my own decision to do history, it's not as if, well, I talked about my interest and it was enough to stay in history. But it is not the case that when I finished school, this is what I had planned for myself in life, that I was going to do a PhD in history. Who knows at that age that you're going to become a researcher and a teacher of history? You're taking these decisions at one step, every some years when you finish your educational degree. So at the end of class 12, I in fact wanted to do law, right? And I didn't get to get in admission into the place that I really wanted to go to. So I decided, and instead I saw the college that I did get into, and I thought, okay, this is quite nice actually. Let me do this. And I enjoyed what I did, right? After that, from my own class of 60 people who did history at the undergraduate level, only 4 or 5 people actually decided to do a master's in history, right? So I just want to talk to the students about what you can do after a bachelor's in history and even after a master's in history, because there were students who did a master's in history and then did not decide to go into an MPhil or a PhD. So even after a master's, there are avenues that open up or avenues that don't close up even after you've done a master's in history. So ranging from of course, the UPSC is a hot favorite, right? History is a subject that a lot of civil service aspirants take as a subject for their undergraduate degree. And I think there is use not just from the point of view of cracking the exam, but also in terms of the kind of person you want to be, the kind of administrator you want to be. Sunandan was talking about the importance of politics and the youth and how they think about their own future. And I think that a background in history is actually quite valuable when you think about the kind of work that you're actually supposed to go out and do as a civil servant, right? What is the knowledge that you need to have at your disposal? So this is not just about taking the exam. This is also about the kind of civil servant you will be and the work you can do to understand the society into which you're going and trying to make a difference. There's media and journalism. There is law that I mentioned. There's teaching, of course, at every level of that profession. There's social work in the development sector. Really, if you think about the history degree, it is because it's a humanities degree, right? The point of a degree in history, if you think about it in a very functionalist way, as in which specific door does it open, maybe the UPSC exam is the only one, because there's a there is an exam, there's a paper in history. But for everything else, what history degrees allow you to do is to actually enter into those fields with a certain kind of training, with a certain kind of familiarity with qualitative research, right? With being able to read complex text, with being able to pay attention to context in order to understand a problem, in order to understand what can be done. So if you're going into a sector like social work, for instance, we think we want to make a positive contribution to society. What does How are you going to do that? What do you need to know about a given area, about a given social group, about the history of the place before you can start to do that, right? The other thing is, of course, when you do this kind of work, you one of the ways in which you make a contribution is by firstly doing research as to what is the problem facing a given society, what kind of positive contribute, what should the policy look like on the, if this is the problem, what should the policy look like. This requires doing a certain kind of research, a certain kind of qualitative research, right? Which is something that history students in the English department, social science, all of these disciplines of the humanities taken together really equip you with those skills. And they're useful not just in sectors like social work and development, but I have friends, for instance, who studied with me both at the undergraduate level and the master's level, who went on to do a MBA and now work for Meta, the company that owns Facebook and Instagram. They are very senior professionals in the world of marketing, which is another area where you need to do qualitative research, right? So these may not seem like they directly pertain to history, but the thing about the history degree is what all it allows you to do, right? No door is closed because you've done history. In fact, you enter into the job market with skills which typically other students who have gone into more quantitative disciplines do not have, unless they come to Azim Premji University, because we do, as Sunandan was saying, do these courses called Understanding India, where irrespective of the discipline that you have been part of till school, you do get this kind of rounded education, right? And so I would say social work, law, market research. You can do an MBA afterwards if you want it. If you're really interested in history but don't necessarily want to go into teaching, heritage management, conservation, you can be a curator, a gallerist, you can be an archivist, you can be an entrepreneur, really, with your particular interest. I've noticed, we were talking about social media and its kind of challenges, but also the use that it uses that it comes into, right? And so social media today is full of young people on Instagram who are conducting walks in the neighborhoods and the cities that they know really well, right? And introducing other people to the history of the places that we live in, but don't necessarily take the time to actually go out and look at, right? Even if this is not something you do professionally, but it is something that can be deeply satisfying and can become a professional pursuit as well, if you choose to do so. So I would say history opens many, many doors, and certainly doesn't close any doors, more importantly.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Such words of wisdom will definitely help our viewers gain a wider perspective for the subject. And I think they should feel confident now to choose history as a subject for higher education.
My final question to Professor Sunandan. Sir, what emerging trends or issues in political science research do you think will become increasingly important for the students in the near future?
Okay, there are, I think, two different kinds of set of issues I will say very important in the contemporary world, especially in the domain of political science. One is the study of governance, which is the policies, how government works, what are the changes happening in governing, what are the local level administrations happening, what are the bureaucracy and relation between, say, different kinds of power structures within, especially legal, executive, and parliament, etc. So these things are becoming very important, and how governments work as a policy study. This is becoming very important in these days. So a lot of major institutions are into policy studies, and they are very, like, of course, depending on which company, which, like which agency, which NGO, etc. It depends on what is their contribution. But I think this has become very important, that there are professionals who study what is happening in politics. That is on the one hand, one side. But also, on the other hand, I think it's very important for everybody to have a clear understanding in the present about caste and religion, which are the major social organizing category in India. Samira has already made that point that how religion is for good or bad, that's a different question. That's only we have to study and understand it. But it's there and it's a central organizing category in our social life. So because of that, I think more and more people should engage in understanding religious practice, its relation to politics, its relation to political power, caste and its exclusionary mechanisms in the contemporary modern world. These things are very important, I think, in our society. These are two kind of things I will say we need to study, and we need a lot of professional people in this area. And I think study of social science is enabling you to enter into this field.
Thank you so much, Serge, for sharing your valuable ideas. I'm sure it will leave an everlasting impact on our audience. Our viewers feel empowered with the knowledge shared with them on this platform. Thank you so much, our dear guests. We have now completed with our question round, and we have something very interesting coming up. Some of our students are very keen to have the popular rapid fire round with our esteemed guests. I'm sure our speakers will thoroughly enjoy this round as much as we are looking forward to it. So, dear guests, brace yourselves up for the questions to answer in quick succession. The first thing that comes to your mind. Over to you, Manvik.
Good evening, Suranda sir. I am Manvik from 10th grade, and I'm very, very grateful to be given this
Hello, Manvi.
opportunity to talk to a mentor like you. So, I have five main rapid fire questions to ask you, and I hope we can get straight into it. So, sir, my first question to you is, if you were given a chance, which personality from history would you like to meet, whether they were alive or deceased, and why so?
Oh, I think I want to meet Shah Jahan. Uh, I think who was very hedonistic or whatever, like, but also big empire. I'm very curious about him.
Yes, so that's an
And also
interesting
his
answer.
policies and things were, like very huge shift in the Mughal policies, etc. So
Yes, sir, yes. So that's an interesting answer, sir. So, sir, my second question to you is, if you could travel to any historical place, where would you go and why?
no, I consider every place as historical place. Like all places were there. So I don't think, but I'm very interested generally in going to Egypt. And so I may say, not just because of historical monuments, but generally I'm attracted to that kind history of Egypt. So maybe.
Yes, sir, Egypt is a very interesting place, and I think all of us should go there just to see the interesting history. So, sir, my third question to you is, which was your favorite subject in school and why so?
Mathematics and physics.
Yes, sir. I don't think a lot of students are very keen on taking on mathematics and physics because they find it very difficult. So, sir, my fourth question to you
I
is,
will say that history and political science, everything is difficult. But, like the question is whether you have a passion to understand that.
yes,
In that
yes.
way, physics is very interesting. Like I will not deny that. I left physics and mathematics, but I will not say that they are boring subject. They are very interesting.
Yes, sir. Even I find physics and math really interesting. So, sir, my fourth question to you is, if you were the prime minister for one day, what change would you bring to the nation?
Uh, I'll bring back Article 370 and allow have a plebiscite in Kashmir.
That's an interesting answer, sir. Okay, so, sir, my fifth and my final question to you is, if you were given a chance to make a movie on any historical event, which event would you choose and why?
Historical event. Okay. Uh, that's, like hundreds of events are very interesting. Uh, but I will say what, like from a perspective of person living in Calicut coast when Vasco da Gama arrived, like how did they was approaching
Yes,
and
sir,
what
yes.
Vasco da Gama see was maybe some interesting. So I'm
Yes, sir. It
selecting that
must have been a very
region. That's why. Yeah.
it must have been a very interesting expedition from by Vasco da Gama to come to India for the first time without knowing that it's actually he's reached India instead of America. So now I would like to give this rapid fire question over to Ashi.
Good evening, ma'am. Okay, my name is Ashi Roy. I'm part of 12th grade, and I'm extremely grateful to be a part of this show and gain some wonderful insights from both the guests. Today, I have the honor of asking Miss Samira Junaid some exciting rapid fire questions. So, ma'am, are you ready for it?
Yep,
Okay,
as
so
ready as I could ever be.
okay, ma'am. So, my first question for you is since you've been working on the Many Dargahs of Nagaur, which is a book based on one of South India's most celebrated Sufis, I would love to know if you could be one Sufi saint for a day, who would that be and why?
Oh, wow. That is a really fascinating question. So I think I would have to choose Nizamuddin Aulia, whose dargah is located in Delhi, the city that I grew up in. And for a number of reasons, but most especially because he is associated with a host of music, right? There's a lot of Qawwali music that became popular through the Chishti Sufis, of whom he was a really important part, that silsila of Sufis. And I think it's the association between that form of music and this particular Sufi order that for me is perhaps the most attractive quality. And I would love to be Nizamuddin Aulia for a day. And there are a number of other reasons, but I can't get into all of them.
Ma'am,
But maybe
that's a wonderful
definitely.
answer. So I think it would be super interesting to like spend a day as a Sufi and it would give us so much perspective on that history. So my second question for you is, as someone who's been working on exploring the Islamic influences on Carnatic music and reviving its rich history, what is your personal favorite raga and why?
This is a bad question. I'll tell you why. Because growing up, I was exposed to both Hindustani music and to Carnatic music. But I have to say that I have not developed a ear for Carnatic music, and I remain definitely strongly committed to Hindustani music over Carnatic music, right? But I think of the ragas which probably exist in the south too. I think Basant is my favorite rag in Indian classical music.
Okay, ma'am. I also really like listening to Hindustani classical music. So, okay, ma'am, my next question for you is apart from pursuing your career, I'm aware that you enjoy baking in your free time and trying out new recipes. So, what are some of your favorite dishes to make?
Hmm. Hmm. I'm trying to think. So I have to admit that as much as I like trying out new recipes, most of the time, especially when you have a job, you're trying to make sure that you have food at home when you come back from a long day of work, right?
Mhm.
Some of the things I really enjoy, I have to say, are rajma is one of my favorite things. I could eat it 5 times a week. A second dish that I really love, and my father used to make this, and I never learned the recipe from him, which I really regret, is making mutton keema in a style which comes from our family, right, in a part of Old Delhi. So it's not just any recipe; it's the family recipe. That's my second most favorite thing. And I think momos, which I don't make and I have no interest in making because it looks like a lot of work, but I
Wow.
absolutely
It
love
is.
momos.
It is, ma'am. Yeah. Ma'am, so even I really enjoy baking. So I really love these dishes as well. So moving on to the next question. As you have worked in a publishing house and written several papers and books, what is the book you have enjoyed reading and would recommend students like us to read?
So I should mention that publishing is one of the fields that you can enter into professionally after doing history. But I think the book that really captivated me, especially as a historian, And I had the opportunity of, it was a peculiar coincidence of reading it at the right time. So there's a book called In an Antique Land. It is written by the novelist Amitabh Ghosh, who was trained as an anthropologist, and he writes historical fiction. So he does a lot of historical research, but the story that he's telling is actually fictional, but it comes on the back of a lot of actual research work. And this particular book, In an Antique Land, is set in Egypt, the place that Sunandan wants to go to, and brings up through archival records and through ethnography the ties between India and Egypt, right? In the classical period and even after. And I read it at a time when I read it at a time when I was being taught by an absolutely incredible historian of late antiquity whose focus is that part of the world. His name is Jairus Banaji. You should look him up and look up his work. And it was as if the book came to life because we were being taught something absolutely closely aligned with what the book was discussing. So I think I have been in love with that book ever since, and I have been recommending it to everybody that I know. You should certainly read it. It's called In an Antique Land by Amitabh Ghosh.
Ma'am, thank you so much for the recommendation. Reading is a passport to like countless adventures. So I'm sure all of us would love to explore this book as well. So my final question for you today is, if you could time travel, which era of history would you like to visit and why?
I think I want to go to India just after 1947.
Oh,
I think a lot of us think about traveling far back in time. I feel like I want to know more about the context in which I live, and maybe I can access that a little bit more by going to the period where my parents grew up. And seeing India as it was in that point, at that point in time, to really understand where we are today in reference to just the immediate past. I think it would have been a terribly exciting time actually to be in India at that time, because it's not that far ago that you can't understand it. You don't know what people are doing. It's right next to us in time. It is the time in which our parents and our grandparents lived, and it is immediately accessible. So I feel like it'd be actually quite interesting to be just in 1947 and just after.
yes, ma'am. So as a student who's also studying history and we've studied this period as well, just this year, I also think it would be an incredibly like fun experience to be a part of the period during that time. So this brings us to the end of your rapid fire round, ma'am. Thank you so much for answering all of my questions with so much enthusiasm and patience. It was lovely talking to you.
Thank you again, everyone, for having me.
As we come to the end of this wonderful session, it is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks. Firstly, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to our chief guests, Professor Sunandar K.N. and Professor Samira Junaid, for taking their time out to grace us with their presence and for delivering such an inspiring and insightful talk show. Your words have indeed enlightened and motivated us all. I would also like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to our management, our principal, Dr. Manila Carvalho, our vice principal, Ms. Preeti Sutha, for facilitating such an interesting platform to enlighten the students, teachers, and parents. A heartfelt gratitude to the senior mistresses, coordinators, and teachers for their valuable contribution and support. A big thank you to our HOD of Social Science Department, Mr. T.N. Chandrasekhar, sir, for your dedication and hard work behind the scenes. Thank you, sir. We would also like to extend our gratitude to the heads of the Department of English, Ms. Sonali Roy and Ms. Sioni Dixit from the English Department, for your meticulous planning and attention to detail have ensured that everything ran smoothly. A big shout out to our technical team, Ms. Pallavi and Ms. Zara, for ensuring that everything was in place and the event proceeded without any hitches. To all the parents, teachers, and students, thank you for your participation and engagement. Your presence has made this event vibrant and successful. We hope you have found it informative and worthwhile. On behalf of the DPS family, I once again extend my heartfelt thank you to everyone involved. Let's continue to carry forward the spirit of relevance of past and present as we come to the close of the session. Thank you and have a great evening. This is Ruparna signing off.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm supposed to speak. I just wanted to quickly say thank you all again.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So here's Devashri Chatterjee signing off too. Have a great